Clyde Anderson was actually my step-grandfather.
Okay.
My grandmother, her husband died he was 49, I think it was 1950, 51, somewhere in there. Anyway, after a short period of time, she met him somehow because they were both connected with the Lakewood area. And they ended up getting married. They bought a small farm over in Bustye that was in pretty sad shape when they moved over there. And they fixed it up. They lived over there for a number of years until he died in 1984. My childhood, my parents were divorced when I was a little over a year old, so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents and grew up knowing him as the only grandfather that I had. My paternal grandfather had died years before I was born. So with him, he loved kids. Never had any biological kids of his own, but he was just, you could just see the light in his eyes when he was around kids, and he tended to act like one a lot of the time himself too.
You got a lot of attention.
I did. I got a tremendous amount of attention. We got into quite a bit of mischief together, and my grandmother picked up on that pretty fast.
Describe him.
He was a big guy. Pretty much always had a smile on his face. In addition to kids, he just loved people. He was the kind of guy that came from pretty humble beginnings, but he could walk into a room and feel completely comfortable. And he would get somebody engaged in a conversation, asking him a few questions, and then he really enjoyed sitting back and listening to him. He was very conversational himself, but he really enjoyed learning about other people. He just kind of had a thirst for knowledge, and I don't think that ever left him. He was born around the turn of the century, I think 1903. Several brothers and 3 younger sisters, and their parents both died at a very early age. Their mother died, and their father was killed when he was just a boy in a car accident in Westfield. And they kind of fended for themselves. The brothers were very involved in cattle business and meat cutting and things like that, and they worked to put their sisters through school. After he married my grandmother, they bought that small farm over in Bustye. When they did, they just kind of ran a subsistence farm, and he did a lot of custom farming for other people around the community. He had a tractor and some machinery and things like that, and he would plow and disc and bale hay, and had a combine that I spent a lot of hours on, and it was just kind of a small farm approach. He always had a few cows in the barn. They sold some milk. He loved horses, and he was quite a horse trader in his time, and just kind of a country farmer at the time. Like a lot of people were at that time. There weren't as many really big farms as what there are now. There was just a farm on every corner, it seemed.
Maybe you mentioned it, but where was the farm?
Bustye, Pine Ridge Road.
How did his paths sort of cross Robert Jackson?
I wish I knew that. He died when I was 29 years old. A lot of my recollections of him talking to me about Mr. Jackson were when I was growing up, because a lot of them were lessons learned in just integrity and morals, and he referred to them often.
Yeah.
And I really don't know where they first met. I wish I had the sense to ask a few more questions. I was born in 1954. Probably he started telling me about some of his earliest recollections. I would guess I started school about 1960, so I'd say definitely some of it was during the 60s and carried on through the time that he died. I always kind of knew who he was. What surprised me was I thought it was kind of a big deal, because if I told somebody else, my grandfather was Robert Jackson's chauffeur, a lot of people were a little curious about who Robert Jackson was, and that always surprised me. And that's why when a lot of the local interests started to develop around here, I kind of thought, gee, why is this taking so long? Yeah, when he wanted to make a point with me, he would let me know, and he referred to him as Jackson. That was always his reference, and I remember one time in particular, and I was a young adult at the time. We bought an old farm up in the town of Ellicott up on Town Line Road. And there was a couple of buildings there that were pretty old, and there was a silo there, and part of the property was still in somebody else's ownership, and they sold this silo. My grandfather was there because we entered into a couple of cattle raising ventures together and things like that. And I was having a fit because these guys were going to move this silo. It was an old wooden silo, pretty heavy, and they braced it up inside, and they were going to tip it over with a truck, and I wasn't happy at all about that. And he was there. These guys had a plan laid out. They tried to tip it over with what they call a gin pull, and I was just afraid this was going to crash my building, and sure enough it did. But before that, we had already determined that they had insurance and so on, so he was always pretty calm. I was mad as a hornet, and I was ready to just storm over there and give these guys one side and the other. And he just took me aside for a minute. He said, you don't kick a man when he's down. And he attributed that to Robert Jackson. He said, that's just one of the things. You stick up for the little guy. You don't kick a man when he's down. You give it a little time and then go back. You'll get your pound of flesh. You've got it coming, but right now is not the time.
Time frame when your grandfather would have been a chauffeur with Jackson, but did he talk about that? Was it?
Not relative to years or decades or anything like that, but a couple of the things that I do remember were when he talked about Mr. Jackson going to Washington, he tried to convince him to go with him. Said, I can keep you in a job down there. I'm going to need a driver. And he thought about it, and being kind of a country guy and pretty comfortable here, he decided to stay here. And I don't know how old, who he referred to as Billy and Mary, I don't know how old they were, but he always gave me the impression that they were 3, 4, 5 years old when he was taking them around and taking Mrs. Jackson around town for various kinds of appointments and things.
Bill was born in 1919.
Okay.
And Mary was born in 1921.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
So probably they are 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
It's probably the very late 20s or 1930, 31, 32. 34 is when Jackson goes to Washington.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mom was 13.
And Clyde continued, I know from letters, to do odd jobs and house repairs and sidewalk and barn stuff at the house, Fairmount Ave, West Ellicott,
Mm-hmm.
after that. So 34, 35, 36.
Yeah, there were a lot of references to the fact that he was kind of a self-made man. That was his quote. He was always a good driver, very careful driver, and but I don't know of him driving for anybody else. He mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it to you, Greg, but I think I did to John, that there apparently was a fairly large boat that Mr. Jackson either owned or, and that was part of his job too, when,
I was going to ask you the alibi.
yeah. Okay, all right.
Right. It was
Now
on
that you
in Lakewood,
okay,
and somebody'd have to go out and
Yep.
Start it up and bring it into the dock and
yep.
have it ready for.
And I do remember that, and it's funny that you mentioned the name of it because I recall that.
My impression was that Clyde did a whole lot more than just drive around, and there's some documentation that that's true.
Laying a new sidewalk is one thing, and
Mm-hmm.
shoeing a horse and working up at the horse farm. Jackson had a horse farm up at Lakewood too. And so
Was that what became the stock farm later?
that was Jackson's.
Okay.
That was Jackson's
Okay.
horse place.
Okay.
So do you remember your grandfather saying that he had worked there?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He my impression was that he kind of managed that after Mr. Jackson left. That's where he returned to.
Right. But
Yeah.
Jackson continued to own it
Okay.
when he was in Washington for
Okay.
a number of years till he sold out to his partners.
I really got the sense that Clyde was the horse trainer and the dog trainer. And this one story, I think, is Clyde. I have a terrible memory and not very. So I got the sense that he was the trainer. Whoever was the trainer was a no-nonsense kind of trainer, like would not take any nonsense from that animal. I remember her saying that. And they had German Shepherds, and then Mom had German Shepherds as I was growing up. And the story goes that she's like 3 years old or so, and the trainer of the German Shepherd would throw her up in the air, that was so much fun, and threw her up a little too far, and she squealed and was really scared, and the German Shepherd bit the trainer. And I think that was Clyde. Does that ring a bell?
It does. I don't remember that story in particular, but I do remember him making references to police dogs, not German Shepherds, but police dogs at the time. Yep.
And Mom said that in her mind that characterized how German Shepherds think that they would protect the small and bite the trainer. So yeah, that's one I think is a Clyde story.
So just on dates, the telegram is 1933.
Okay.
The other mentions in a couple of Bill to Dad letters are 1931.
Okay.
So that's when he's
Okay.
at least doing some of the driving and odd jobs around the house. You remembered Clyde Anderson telling you a story about a deer hunting trip at Allegheny State Park, and you wrote it up beautifully. That Clyde said they went hunting on horseback. In addition to Jackson, there were several other influential gentlemen. They stayed at a lodge in the park. You thought that meant what's today the administration building at the Red House in the area, and so forth. Can you elaborate on that all? Was it,
I wish I had more information than that, but that was the administration building at Red House. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a beautiful big stone building with a slate roof, a lot of room, a great room with a big stone fireplace, and just the type of place that it apparently was originally a lodge when it was built. It overlooks Red House Lake. And the way he described the accommodations down there, I just assumed that that's probably where they stayed. And I don't know who any of the other people were that were with him, but that's kind of what he relayed to me, was that Mr. Jackson was entertaining, and these people were part of the group he was taking down there.
and that would have been deer hunting, or?
Yeah, deer hunting. Yeah. He mentioned her from time to time. He obviously was very held her in high regard and a lot of respect, and thought she was obviously a great mom.
Any wild stories about Julia's mom we could talk about?
Are you going to shut this off? No, I never heard her described in anything but a lot of respect. Yeah.
She was
a wild child.
She
Was
was
she?
a wild child. She was the horse kid. She was the farm kid. She was more the troublemaker kid. Billy was the,
Yeah. She got in a lot of trouble. So was Clyde involved in the story of Buster? Buster the pony, and they wanted to show everybody how Buster could climb upstairs. So they had Buster climb up the exterior. This is the guys, not Mom. She got in a lot of trouble, but this was apparently not her. So these guys, and I wonder if Clyde was one. Clyde took Buster up the exterior stairs, to the second floor.
at the house.
No, this was somebody, not the house. Those houses that have the exterior, that like a fire, or if you have another. It was one of those, sort of more downtown type of house.
Okay.
That's my or a row house or something. But
Okay.
at the end unit. But Buster wouldn't come down. And Mom says that a guy had to take each leg and carry this pony down the stairs.
I could talk for hours about the guy. He was, and of course, in the last couple of weeks, a lot more memories pop into my mind.
Do you have any photos of him? Do you have any of his stuff?
I have a couple things I've got his pocket watch. I've got some later life photos, but as I mentioned, my mom is ailing, and I'm sure she's got some of my grandmother's things. My grandmother died in 98. She stayed on the farm over there until about 92, and we sold it and moved her closer to us. You mentioned the oil wells. that was a real source of interest to him. He was approaching retirement age when they started. I think it was about 66 when they began to drill over there. And he was just keenly interested in that. He was out there constantly. They ended up probably drilling between 15 and 20 wells on the property. And they were shallow wells. They were like 700-foot oil wells. And he knew everything from when they parked the drilling rig until they put the piping in to pump it to the tanks. And they didn't get rich on it, but they made a few bucks off the royalties and were able to do what they wanted to do later in life and enjoyed it.
Yeah, because Mom did stay in touch with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember her saying, oh, Clyde's just, or who now I realize it was Clyde, he's just sitting there watching the pumps go. Like, this is how she characterized. He was just sitting there watching it and just super happy about it, and we all got a chuckle out of it. I wonder who had the farm, which I really think was Sugar Grove, when Jackson and his daughter would ride their horses to Spring Creek. They'd overnight, and I'm pretty sure it was in Sugar Grove.
Clyde had a brother named John who had a farm right on the Bustye Sugar Grove Road, just over the state line toward Sugar Grove. He ended up, he was killed in a farming accident. A tractor rolled over on him, probably in the early 60s. So it could have been his farm. House was on one side of the road, the barn on the other. And it was right there in the neighborhood.
But also, Mom was not involved with trotters, and she really didn't like that aspect of the farm. She didn't like that racing. She did shows, she did a lot of jumping. So I think you had a whole crew that was with the trotters that she wouldn't have talked about. So that's why I feel like Clyde.
She did English or Western?
English. Yeah, she got ribbons, like, because she was fearless.
Mm-hmm.
And I rode with her a lot in Spring Creek. But yeah, she would have been talking about the pleasure horses, not the trotters.
This has been great. This has been great. This is one of these guys who is a bid player and a quality bid, and you give us a little sense of it.
Well, I was just really happy to find out that there was any recollection left.